Hi, everybody. I just wanted to read this article aloud, and you can follow along as I read. So this article is about the Lincoln and Douglas debates. The Lincoln-Douglas debates were a series of 7 debates between the Democratic Senator Stephen A. Douglas and the Republican challenger Abraham Lincoln during the 1858 Illinois senatorial campaign, largely concerning the issue of slavery extension into the territories. So what this means is that these two gentlemen, Stephen A. Douglas and Abraham Lincoln, were both running for the Senate as a representative of Illinois. And their big issue, the big thing that they all wanted to talk about, was whether or not slavery would be allowed in the new territories in the United States. So these two gentlemen had 7 debates. They had discussions with each other, and often they talked about slavery. The slavery extension question. So that's, remember, slavery going into the new territories in the United States. And remember, before we stayed home, we talked about territories when we talked about westward expansion. So now the big question is, will they allow slaves in that territory or not? So the slavery extension question had seemingly been settled by the Missouri Compromise nearly 40 years earlier. The Mexican War, however, had added new territories, and the issue flared up again in the 1840s. The Compromise of 1850 provided a temporary respite from sectional strife. That just means that they had a break from all of their arguing. But the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854, a measure Douglas sponsored, so something that Stephen Douglas was in support of, he liked it, brought the slavery extension issue to the fore once again. That means it brought it back up again. Everybody was talking about it again. Douglas's bill, in effect, repealed the Missouri Compromise by lifting the ban against slavery in territories north of the 3630 latitude. So, in place of the ban, Douglas offered popular sovereignty, the doctrine that the actual settlers in the territories and not Congress should decide the fate of slavery in their midst. So the original compromise, the Missouri Compromise, stated that they couldn't have slavery above or north of this line on the map. So you can see this line right here. The Missouri Compromise said anything above would be no slavery, and anything below could have slavery. But later, this idea of popular sovereignty came up, and that was the idea that people who actually lived in the territories would be allowed to vote. So the citizens would vote. And that's a picture of Stephen Douglas right there. The Kansas-Nebraska Act spurred the creation of the Republican parties. That is a political party formed largely to keep slavery out of the Western territories. So this party was actually made because they didn't want slavery to be in the territories. And these were all people in this party who were against slavery. Both Douglas's doctrine of popular sovereignty and the Republican stand on free soil were seemingly invalidated by the Dred Scott decision of 1857, in which the Supreme Court said that neither Congress nor the territorial legislature could exclude slavery from a territory. So now you have this political party who's been formed, and their whole goal is to have what they call free soil. They want to have the land be free, no slavery. And they are dealing with this idea that Stephen Douglas has established in the Kansas-Nebraska Act, where people would be able to practice popular sovereignty. They would vote on whether they wanted to have slaves or not in their territory. Then the Dred Scott decision, so this was a Supreme Court case. So this slave, Dred Scott, who lived in a free state, was not entitled to his freedom. So the Supreme Court ruled on March 6th, 1857, that Dred Scott, who had resided in a free state and territory where slavery was allowed, was not thereby entitled to his freedom. So he wasn't allowed to be free. That African Americans were not and could never be citizens of the United States, and that the Missouri Compromise of 1820, which had declared, and we talked about this a minute ago, that all free states, okay, west of the Missouri and north of this line here, which we looked at a moment ago, that was here, north of this line, west of this line, that the Supreme Court said that was unconstitutional. So the Supreme Court said that this idea didn't follow the Constitution, and therefore it didn't work. It didn't count anymore. When Lincoln and Douglas debated the slavery extension issue in 1858, therefore they were addressing the problem that had divided the nation into two hostile camps and that threatened the continued existence of the Union. Their contest, as a consequence, had repercussions far beyond determining who would win the senatorial seat at stake. So what that's saying is they argued about whether or not slavery should be legal in the new territories. And even though Stephen Douglas did win, he did become the senator, Abraham Lincoln made a name for himself, and he became a very important person in the Republican Party. So when Lincoln received the Republican nomination to run against Douglas, he said in his acceptance speech that a house divided against itself cannot stand. And that's a famous quote from Abraham Lincoln. A house divided against itself cannot stand, and that this government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free. So he was kind of predicting what was going to happen, which eventually was a war. Douglas thereupon attacked Lincoln as a radical, threatening the continued stability of the Union. Lincoln then challenged Douglas to a series of debates, and the two eventually agreed to hold joint encounters, debates, conversations, discussions in 7 Illinois congressional districts.